My mother-in-law looked at me like I was nothing, like I was already a ghost. She said, "If you vanished tomorrow, nobody would even miss you." So I made her words come true. That night I disappeared. No note, no phone. No goodbye. I became exactly what she wanted me to be. Invisible. I packed one bag, left my phone behind, and walked into the darkness. But what I did next, and what I discovered about her past, made me realize I wasn't just disappearing, I was about to destroy her entire world. My mother-in-law, Allure, had a way of speaking that felt like she was carving her words into your skin with a cold, sharp knife. The day she said it, I was standing in her pristine, white kitchen, the one that always smelled of lemon polish and something faintly antiseptic, like a hospital for rich people. I was trying to help clean up after a family dinner I hadn't been wanted at. I was wiping down the granite countertops, a job she deemed was safe for me to do, when she looked at me, her eyes the color of a winter sky, and said, "You know, Abigail, if you vanished tomorrow, nobody would even miss you." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. She didn't even look at me. She was arranging a vase of peonies, those big, blousy pink flowers that were far too cheerful for the venom that filled the room. My husband, Mark, was in the living room with his father, the sound of their low, comfortable voices drifting in like a distant memory of a home I'd never truly had. I just stood there, the damp dishcloth frozen in my hand, the cold of the granite seeping through the fabric and into my palms. The words didn't just hurt, they annihilated something inside me. They were a confirmation of every unspoken slight, every cold shoulder, every time I'd been made to feel like an interloper in my own life. And the worst part, a tiny, insidious part of my brain, the part that had been eroded by years of her quiet, persistent cruelty, whispered, "She's right." I thought about all the dinners I had cooked for this family, meals that took hours to prepare, only to have Allure criticize the seasoning or complain that the presentation wasn't up to her standards. I thought about all the holidays I had spent trying to fit in, buying expensive gifts I couldn't afford, laughing at inside jokes I wasn't part of, smiling until my cheeks ached while my heart slowly broke. I thought about the way Mark would squeeze my hand under the table when his mother made a particularly cutting remark, as if that small gesture could somehow undo the damage of her words. But it never did. It just made me feel more alone, more isolated, more like a stranger in my own marriage. That night I lay in bed next to Mark. He was already asleep, his breathing deep and even, his back to me. He was a good man, or at least I had convinced myself he was. He was kind in a distracted, oblivious way. He worked hard, he didn't cheat, and he never raised his voice. But he was also blind. Blind to the subtle warfare his mother waged against me. He'd always have an excuse. "That's just how she is, Abby. She didn't mean it like that. You're being too sensitive." The words had become a mantra, a lullaby that had put my own sense of self-worth to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster with my eyes. The silence of the room was thick, heavy with the unspoken. I replayed her words in my head, over and over, until they became a dull, throbbing ache. Nobody would even miss you. It was the final, devastating verdict on my existence. I started to think about my own mother, who had passed away when I was just 17. She had been a warm, loving woman who always told me I was special, that I mattered, that I could do anything I set my mind to. She had died of cancer, slowly and painfully, and I had watched her fade away, unable to do anything to save her. After she was gone, I had felt so alone in the world. My father had remarried quickly, a woman who made it clear she didn't want me around. I had been shuffled off to college, then to a series of apartments, always searching for a place to belong. When I met Mark, I thought I had finally found it. I thought I had found a family. But Allure had made sure I never truly belonged. I remembered the first time I met her. I had been so nervous, so eager to make a good impression. I had worn my best dress, brought a homemade pie, and practiced my most charming smile. Allure had looked me up and down with those cold, winter sky eyes and said, "Well, you're certainly different from what I expected." At the time, I had taken it as a compliment. Now I knew it was the first of 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to remind me that I was an outsider, an intruder, someone who didn't belong in their perfect world. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, watching the digital clock on the bedside table blink away the minutes. At 3:15 a.m., a strange, profound clarity washed over me. It wasn't a decision, not really. It was more of a surrender to the truth. She was right. I had been so focused on trying to be a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, on trying to earn a place in a family that had never wanted me, that I had become a ghost in my own life. I was a supporting character in a story where I was supposed to be the protagonist. My presence was a convenience, a function. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled, I kept up appearances, but I was fundamentally invisible. I thought about all the years I had wasted trying to please people who would never be pleased. I thought about all the dreams I had given up, the career I had put on hold, the friendships I had neglected, all in the name of being a good wife. I had shrunk myself so small, so insignificant, that I had almost disappeared entirely. And now Alina had confirmed what I had been afraid to admit to myself. I was already a ghost. I was already invisible. I might as well make it official. And so I decided to make her words a reality. I would vanish. Not in a dramatic, suicidal way, but in a quiet, strategic, and utterly final way. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would give them my absence. I slipped out of bed, my movements as silent as a shadow. I didn't look at Mark. I felt a strange, detached pity for him. He'd sleep right through the unraveling of his own life. I walked into the walk-in closet, the one that was filled with my clothes but never truly felt like mine. I packed a single, medium-sized duffel bag. Not clothes, they were too easily traced. Just the essentials. My passport, my birth certificate, my social security card. The few pieces of jewelry my own grandmother had left me, not for their monetary value, but for their sentimental weight. A few $1,000s in cash I'd been saving for an emergency that had finally arrived. I left my phone on the dresser, its screen dark and silent. That was the first step in disconnecting from the world I was leaving behind. I paused at the bedroom door and looked back at Mark one last time. He looked so peaceful, so oblivious. I wondered if he would even notice I was gone in the morning, or if he would just assume I had gone for a walk or run an errand. I wondered how long it would take for him to realize I wasn't coming back. A day, a week, a month. The thought should have made me sad, but instead it filled me with a cold, hard determination. I was done being invisible. I was going to become a ghost they would never forget. I didn't write a note. What would I say? I'm proving you right, Alina? No, I wanted to be a mystery, a question mark, a blank space. I wanted them to wonder. I wanted them to feel a sliver of the uncertainty and doubt she had so carefully planted in my soul for years. I wanted to see if the act of vanishing would make me more real to them than my presence ever had. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the slow, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I left the house through the back door, the one that led to the garden. The night air was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the stifling, emotionally cloying atmosphere of the house. I didn't look back. I walked to the end of the street and called a cab from a payphone. The metallic smell of the receiver, a sharp reminder that I was no longer in the world of Wi-Fi and smartphones. I gave the driver the address for the Greyhound station downtown. The city was still asleep, the streets slick with a recent rain. It was a liminal space, a world between worlds, and I felt perfectly at home in it. At the bus station, I bought a ticket to the first destination that caught my eye. A small town called Millbrook, about 6 hours away. I didn't know anything about it, but that was exactly the point. I wanted to go somewhere where nobody knew me, where I could start over completely. The bus was nearly empty, just a few other travelers scattered in the dimly lit cabin. I found a seat in the back, away from everyone, and watched the city lights fade into the darkness. On the bus, I rode for hours, watching the landscape change from the manicured suburbs to the urban sprawl, and finally to the rolling, anonymous hills of the countryside. I had no destination in mind. I just had to go. I got off at a small town, the kind with a single main street, and a diner that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1950s. I bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash and a map of the state. This was my new life. Simple, anonymous, a life of solitude. For the first few weeks, I lived a ghost-like existence. I found a room to rent above a garage from a quiet, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable who asked no questions. I worked odd jobs for cash, cleaning houses, doing yard work, helping a local baker with the early morning shift. I became a master of invisibility. Mrs. Gable was a widow in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen a lot of life. She didn't pry into my past, didn't ask where I came from or why I was alone. She just accepted my rent in cash and left me alone. Sometimes she would bring me fresh-baked cookies or invite me down for tea, and I would sit in her cozy kitchen and listen to her talk about her late husband and her children who had moved away. It was simple and uncomplicated, and I cherished it more than I could express. The work was hard but honest. I cleaned houses for wealthy families who were never satisfied, just like a leaner. I pulled weeds and mowed lawns under the hot sun. I got up at 4 a.m. to help the baker, Mr. Henderson, prepare his dough for the day. He was a gruff old man who didn't say much, but he always made sure I had a hot cup of coffee and a fresh pastry before I started my shift. These small kindnesses meant more to me than all the expensive gifts Mark had ever given me. They were real. They were genuine. They came without strings attached. It was during these weeks that I began to observe, not from the outside, but from a strange, detached place within myself. I started to think about my mother-in-law, not with the fear and hurt I used to, but with a chilling clarity. Her need to control, her obsession with appearances, her constant belittling of me, it wasn't just about me. It was about her. She needed to build herself up by tearing others down. Her whole world was a carefully constructed castle of cards, and I was just a piece of lint she could flick away. But in my silence, in my non-existence, I had become more than just a piece of lint. I had become a threat. I started to think about the psychology of people like a leaner. She was a narcissist, I realized. Everything revolved around her. Her children, her husband, her social circle, they were all just props in her grand performance. She didn't love Mark, she owned him. She didn't love Richard, she controlled him. And me, I was just an inconvenience, a reminder that she wasn't the only woman in her son's life. I had threatened her dominance, her control, and she had done everything in her power to destroy me. But I wasn't destroyed. I was just getting started. I started to make my presence known, but in a way that they would never suspect. I was still Abigail, but I was a ghost. I'd send a postcard from a different city, never signed, just a picture of a lighthouse or a mountain. I knew Mark would recognize my handwriting. I'd write things like, "The view from here is better," or "I'm finally breathing." I knew it would drive his mother crazy. The lack of a return address, the cryptic messages, it was a new kind of warfare, and this time I held all the cards. I was the one creating the narrative, and she was just a character in my story. The first postcard I sent was from a small coastal town. It showed a picture of a lighthouse standing strong against a stormy sky. On the back, I wrote, "The lighthouse keeper told me that even in the darkest storms, the light never goes out. Some things are stronger than they appear." I addressed it to Mark at his office, so a leaner wouldn't intercept it. I imagined him reading it, confused and worried, wondering if I was okay. I imagined him showing it to his mother, and I imagined the look on her face. It gave me a small, dark satisfaction. A few weeks later, I sent another one, this time from a mountain town. The picture showed a solitary cabin surrounded by snow. I wrote, "I've learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. There's a difference I never understood before." I knew Mark would recognize my handwriting. I knew he would be trying to figure out where I was, what I was doing, why I had left. But I also knew that a leaner would be trying to spin it, to make it all about her, to paint me as the villain in her story. I was determined to change that narrative. One afternoon, a few months into my disappearance, I was in a public library in a city 3 states away. It felt safe and anonymous, a perfect place to be invisible. I was using one of their public computers, a luxury I allowed myself. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just skimming the local news from my old hometown. My heart seized in my chest when I saw a familiar name. Eleanor Sterling, my mother-in-law. She was in the local newspaper, and her photo was there, that same tight smile. She was being interviewed about my disappearance. I felt a cold dread snake down my spine, but I couldn't look away. The headline read, "Local family still searching for missing daughter-in-law." My hand trembled as I clicked on the link. The article was a masterclass in spin. It was all from her perspective. My mother-in-law, the grieving, heartbroken matriarch. She spoke of her deep and abiding love for me, the daughter she never had. She talked about our wonderful relationship, how I was the light of their family. She painted a picture of a perfect, loving family unit that had been shattered by my inexplicable disappearance. She talked about the gaping hole I had left in their lives. She even shed a tear for the camera. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. It was a complete and utter fabrication. It was a lie so bold, so audacious, it made my stomach churn. She was using my disappearance not out of concern, but to fuel her own narrative. She was the center of attention, the tragic heroine. She was rewriting history, and I wasn't there to correct it. I read the article over and over, each time feeling more angry, more determined. She had turned my pain into her performance. She had made herself the victim. And the worst part was, people believed her. The comments section was filled with sympathy and prayers for the poor Sterling family. Nobody questioned her story. Nobody knew the truth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the newspaper and tell them everything. But I knew that would just play into her hands. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to paint me as unstable, unreliable, crazy. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. That's when I decided to change the game. I wasn't just going to be a ghost. I was going to be a poltergeist. I was going to haunt them. I was going to make them feel my presence in my absence more acutely than they ever did when I was there. I started sending things to their house. Not gifts. Evidence. I sent a copy of my mother-in-law's own words. I had secretly recorded one of her tirades once, not knowing why at the time. It was a digital file, and I sent it anonymously to Mark's work email. The title was simply, Remember. I sent my father-in-law a picture of the pristine, empty guest room that had been my own personal purgatory with a small caption. So much room for activities. I sent Alina a single, pink peony, the same kind from that fateful dinner, with a note that just said, You were right. Nobody missed me. But you sure are doing a lot of talking about me now, aren't you? I knew what I was doing. I was systematically dismantling the perfect facade she had so carefully crafted. I could imagine the chaos. Mark, confused and angry, his father, finally starting to see the cracks, and Alina, terrified, realizing that I wasn't just a discarded ghost, but a very real, very present threat to her carefully ordered world. The tables had turned. I was no longer the victim of her cruelty. I was the author of her anxiety. A few weeks later, I was in a different city, a bustling college town, when I saw a post on a local missing persons forum. It was a new picture of me, but it was a photo from my high school yearbook, one I didn't even recognize. The post was put up by a private investigator, hired, I learned later, by Mark. He was still looking for me. My mother-in-law's public performance had forced his hand. He couldn't be seen as the husband who didn't care. The post detailed my last known location, my physical description, and a plea for information. There was a reward. It was a significant sum, the kind of money that made strangers turn on each other. I felt a pang of something for Mark. He was still playing the part of the dutiful husband, a pawn in his mother's game. I sat in the library, staring at my own face on the screen. It was a strange feeling, seeing myself the way others saw me. I looked so young, so hopeful. That girl had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that she would be pushed to the edge, that she would have to disappear just to survive. I felt a wave of sadness for her, for the life she had dreamed of, the family she had wanted. But I also felt a fierce pride. That girl was gone. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who wouldn't let anyone erase her. I couldn't take the risk of being found by some random person just looking for a payday. I had to be smarter. I had to hide more effectively. I cut my hair, dyed it a different color, and started wearing glasses. I changed my name to Jane for the time being, a name so common it was a perfect cloak. I left the college town and took a bus to the coast. I found work as a waitress in a small, seaside diner. It was a life of anonymity, but I felt a strange sense of peace there. The rhythm of the tides, the crying of the gulls, the simple, honest work, it was a world away from the silver and crystal of Alina's house. The diner was called the Salty Gull, and it was run by a woman named Maria, a tough but fair former schoolteacher who had retired to the coast. She didn't ask many questions, but she could tell I was running from something. One day, she pulled me aside and said, "I don't know what you're hiding from, honey, but everyone deserves a second chance. You work hard, you're honest, and you don't complain. That's good enough for me." I nearly cried right there in the middle of the diner. It was the first time anyone had said something kind to me in months. The other waitresses were a motley crew of misfits and runaways, each with their own story. There was Lena, a young mother who was trying to escape an abusive relationship. There was Sam, a retired musician who had lost everything in a fire. There was Denise, a grandmother who had come out of retirement because she couldn't stand being at home with her nagging husband. We were all damaged in our own ways, but together we formed a strange kind of family. We looked out for each other. We covered each other's shifts. We listened to each other's stories without judgment. It was the closest thing to a real family I had ever had. One day, a man came into the diner. He was older, with kind eyes and a weary face. He sat in my section and ordered a cup of coffee. I was taking his order when he said, "You look familiar. Do I know you?" My blood ran cold. I froze, my pen hovering over my notepad. He stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "Never mind. My memory's not what it used to be. You just remind me of someone." I served him his coffee and scrambled to the back, my hands shaking. The encounter rattled me. It was a stark reminder that I was still on the grid, even if it was a very fine, almost invisible one. I told Maria about what had happened. She looked at me with concern and said, "Honey, you need to be careful. If someone is looking for you, they might not give up. Maybe you should move on, find a new place to hide." But I didn't want to move on. I had found something here, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. I didn't want to give that up. So I stayed, but I was more careful. I stopped going into town on my days off. I avoided eye contact with strangers. I became even more invisible. That evening, I wrote a new chapter in my haunting. I did some research on the library's computer and found an old email address for my mother-in-law's book club. I sent them a mass email from a burner account. It was a simple message. "For your next meeting, a discussion topic. Define family. Consider how easy it is to edit a person out of the family portrait. And then ask yourselves, is the person who was edited out really the one who is missing? Or is it something else entirely?" I imagined the gossip, the furtive whispers, the matriarch's carefully constructed empire starting to crumble. I was the wrecking ball, and I was swinging. I knew the book club was Aliner's pride and joy. It was made up of the most influential women in town, the ones whose opinions mattered. If I could plant a seed of doubt in their minds, I could start to tear down Aliner's perfect image. I imagined them gathered in someone's living room, sipping wine and discussing my email. I imagined the speculation, the raised eyebrows, the whispered questions. I imagined Aliner trying to explain it away, to spin it into another story. But this time, people might not believe her. This time, the cracks in her armor might finally show. I then decided to send a package to my mother-in-law directly. Inside, I placed a single item, a silver locket. It was mine, one of the few pieces of jewelry I kept. On the inside, I had a jeweler engrave a single line. "A ghost is just a person who is not done living yet." I didn't sign it. I just sent it. I knew she would recognize it. I wanted her to know that I was still there, watching, waiting, and that I was not done with her. I was reclaiming my narrative, piece by piece. A couple of weeks passed in silence. I began to worry that maybe my plan had backfired. Maybe she had just brushed it all off, dismissing it as the work of a jealous ex or a random prankster. Maybe I had overestimated my importance in her life, even as a ghost. But then, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was at the library again, more out of habit than anything else, when I came across an old article in a digital archive. It was a society column from a newspaper from my husband's hometown, about 25 years old. The headline caught my eye, "Young couple wed in quiet ceremony." It was a notice for the wedding of Aliner Vance and Richard Sterling, my mother-in-law and father-in-law. But it wasn't the announcement that froze me in my seat. It was the photograph accompanying it. It showed Aliner, stunning and radiant, not in a white gown, but in a simple, elegant dress. And next to her, smiling and equally radiant, was a bridesmaid. The caption identified her as Maid of Honor, Elizabeth Sterling, sister of the groom. It was the sister. The secret sister. the one who was never mentioned, the one who was quietly and completely erased from the Sterling family history. I remembered hearing a faint, whispered rumor years ago, something about an aunt who had left the family. It had been dismissed so quickly and with such finality that I never thought about it again. But now, staring at the photograph, I had a new understanding. I wasn't the first woman to be edited out of the Sterling family story. There was a precedent. My mother-in-law had a pattern, and it went back decades. I started digging. It wasn't easy. The family had done a thorough job of erasing Elizabeth. There were no public records of her after that year. No marriage license, no death certificate, nothing. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. But I had a name and a face. I started my own investigation, asking discreet questions in my old hometown, using my new identity. It was a painstaking process, like peeling back layers of wallpaper to reveal a secret wall. I spent hours on library computers, searching genealogy websites, and making vague, untraceable phone calls. It was the most thrilling thing I had ever done. It was more real than my life as Mark's wife ever was. I discovered that Elizabeth had been a talented artist. She had studied in Paris, had exhibited her work in galleries, had been on the verge of a promising career. And then she had met Allure. At first, they had been close, like sisters. But something had happened, something that had driven them apart. The rumors were vague and contradictory. Some said Elizabeth had tried to steal Richard's affection. Others said she had discovered a dark secret about Allure. Still others said she had simply refused to be controlled, and that was unforgivable. I didn't know what the truth was, but I was determined to find out. Finally, I found a lead. I found a woman named Elizabeth in a small, rural town 2 states away. She was listed in a property registry as the owner of a house and a small piece of land. The trail was cold, but it was there. I decided to follow it. I packed my small bag and took another bus. I arrived in the town, a quiet place with a population of maybe 500 people. I found the address. It was a small, charming cottage with a garden that was overgrown and wild, but in a beautiful, intentional way. It was the kind of garden that said, "I grow what I want where I want." I knocked on the door, my heart hammering in my chest. A woman opened it. She was older, her face lined with age and a life lived on its own terms. But I recognized her immediately. It was her. It was Elizabeth. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but guarded. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said, my voice trembling. "My name is Abigail. I think I'm your niece-in-law." The name hung in the air between us, a relic of a life she had clearly left behind. I explained who I was and why I was there. I told her about my life with Mark, about his mother's cruelty, and about my disappearance. I told her about the postcards, the haunting, and the article from the paper. I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched her face. It was a fascinating study in emotions. Shock, recognition, anger, and finally, a flicker of a sad, weary smile. "Allure," she finally said, shaking her head. "She never changes." Elizabeth invited me in. She made tea, and we sat in her sun-drenched kitchen, surrounded by the scent of herbs and old wood. She told me her story. It was almost a mirror of my own. She had fallen in love with her brother Richard's best friend. Allure had been the one who orchestrated the match, who had pushed them together. But then, Elizabeth had started to see the real Allure. The jealousy, the manipulation, the need to control. She had made a choice, and in the end, she had been cast out. Her brother, Richard, had been her only champion, but Allure's hold on him was too strong. He had chosen his wife, and Elizabeth had been forced out of the picture. Mark had been a small child at the time, and he had been told Elizabeth had simply moved away. It was a clean, clinical lie that had been accepted without question. "I never wanted a war," Elizabeth said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just wanted to be free, so I left. I disappeared just like you did, only I never looked back. I built this life, this little sanctuary, and I made peace with it." She looked at me with a new understanding in her eyes. "But you, Abigail, you're different. You're coming back." "I'm not coming back to them," I said. "I'm coming back for myself, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Elizabeth smiled. It wasn't a sad smile, but one of fierce, ancestral approval. "Then you will need an ally," she said, "and you have one." We spent the next few days together. Elizabeth showed me letters, old photographs, and documents that painted a complete picture of my mother-in-law's history of manipulation and cruelty. It was a treasure trove of evidence. I had proof, I had a story. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one who was silenced. The letters were the most damning. They were written by Allure herself, and they were filled with venomous words. She had called Elizabeth a jealous harpy and a threat to my family. She had threatened to destroy Elizabeth's career, to ruin her reputation, to make her life a living hell. And she had followed through. After Elizabeth was cast out, her career had dried up. Her friends had abandoned her. She had been forced to start over, alone and penniless. She had rebuilt her life from scratch, but the scars had never fully healed. I left Elizabeth's cottage with a folder full of documents and a new, unshakable purpose. I wasn't just going to haunt Allure. I was going to expose her. I was going to write my own story, and in doing so, I was going to liberate myself from hers. I rented a cheap motel room, one with a rickety desk and a single, bare light bulb, and I started to write. I wrote it all. The cold shoulders, the insults, the cruelty, the details of the dinner. The empty room I was assigned in their house. The postcards I had sent, the haunting, and the discovery of Elizabeth. It was a chronicle of my survival and her villainy. I wrote the truth with a cold, unflinching clarity, and it was the most cathartic thing I had ever done. I wrote for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I wrote about my mother's death and my father's rejection. I wrote about the loneliness of my childhood and the desperate need to belong. I wrote about meeting Mark and falling in love, believing that I had finally found my home. I wrote about Allure's slow, methodical destruction of my self-esteem. I wrote about the night I left, the night I became a ghost. And I wrote about Elizabeth, the woman who had been erased before me. It was a story of survival, of resilience, of finding strength in the darkest places. I didn't want to just destroy her. I wanted to offer a different ending. I wanted to give her a chance to face the truth and make amends. I wanted to see if she was capable of growth, of choosing a different path. If she could, then maybe there was hope for all of us. If she couldn't, then she would be exposed. I went to a lawyer in the city, a woman named Patricia who specialized in high-conflict family cases. I told her my story, showing her all the evidence. She was initially skeptical, as any good lawyer would be. But as I laid it all out, her skepticism turned to professional intrigue. "This is remarkable," she said, flipping through the documents. "What is it you want, Abigail? A divorce, a restraining order, financial recompense?" "No," I said. "I want a meeting, in person, with my husband and with my mother-in-law. I want to confront them. I want to read this to them." I had a thick, carefully organized binder of documents and my own detailed account of events. It was the truth, and I was ready to wield it like a weapon. Patricia nodded slowly. "I can do that, but are you sure this will be a battlefield?" "I'm sure," I said. "This is the only way. I've been invisible for too long. It's time for me to be seen." The meeting was arranged. It was held in Patricia's sterile, corporate office, a fitting venue for the dismantling of a family empire. Mark and Allure arrived together. He looked tired and drawn, his face etched with lines I hadn't seen before. Allure, on the other hand, looked immaculate as always. She wore a power suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. But when she walked in and saw me, her mask of composure cracked for a fraction of a second. I saw it. The shock, the fear, the barely concealed rage. She had seen a ghost, and her ghost was very much alive and ready to tell her story. Mark, though, just stared at me as if I had risen from the dead. "Abby," he said, his voice hoarse and cracked. "Oh my God, you're alive, you're alive." He took a step toward me, but I put up a hand to stop him. "Please, Mark, sit down. We have a lot to talk about." I nodded at Patricia. She sat at the head of the table, a calm, professional presence. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia said. "Abigail has requested this meeting to address the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and her relationship with this family." She started to outline the evidence I had provided. Allure cut her off. "This is absurd, a complete waste of time. Abigail is clearly having a nervous breakdown. She needs professional help, not a lawyer." I looked her directly in the eye. "You're right, Allure. I was having a breakdown. the kind that happens when you've been systematically dismantled by your own family for years. But I'm not broken anymore. I'm here to tell you the truth. I took a deep breath and opened the binder. I started reading from the very beginning, my voice clear and steady. I read about the first time she told me my cooking was too ethnic for her table. I read about the time she told me I was a gold digger for marrying her son. I read about the countless times she had belittled my career, my friends, my family. I read about the night she told me, if you vanished tomorrow, nobody would even miss you. Mark shifted in his seat, his face pale. He was looking at his mother, but she refused to meet his gaze. Stop this, Allure snapped. You have no right to air this family's dirty laundry. I have every right, I said, my voice rising. You made me a ghost, Allure. You erased me from your life, but you couldn't erase me from the world, so I became a ghost you couldn't control. I haunted you. I sent you postcards. I sent you the peonies. I sent you the locket. You had to live with the mystery of my disappearance, didn't you? You had to live with the gossip. You had to live with the uncertainty. That's what you did to me for years, except I did it better. Because I'm not just a victim, I'm a survivor. Then I pulled out the old newspaper clipping. I showed them the picture of Allure and Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth Sterling. You, Mark, are told she was an aunt who just moved away. But that's a lie. She was your father's sister, and she was cast out by this woman, I pointed at Allure, for the same reason I was, because she was a threat. Because she saw the real you, Allure, and she refused to be controlled. Allure's face was ashen. Mark stared at the picture, his mouth agape. Aunt Elizabeth, he whispered. She said she was in a home for the infirm. She lied, I said. She's alive and well, and she's been waiting for someone to come looking for her. She gave me this, all of it. I produced the folder of letters and documents. Mark finally turned to his mother. Mom, what is she talking about? Is this true? Did you do all of this? Allure's composure finally shattered. The careful facade of the perfect matriarch crumbled. Her eyes were wild, her voice shaking. She was a troublemaker, just like you, she spat at me. She was trying to turn Richard against me. She threatened everything I had built. Built on a foundation of lies, I said. You built your kingdom on the backs of the people you cast out. You didn't just break me, Allure. You broke your own family. You erased your sister-in-law. You tried to erase me. But you couldn't erase the truth. There was a long, heavy silence. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother-in-law opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. Mark finally looked at me. There was a new awareness in his eyes, a painful, dawning realization. I'm sorry, Abby, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't see any of it. The meeting ended. It had been a trial, but I had done it. I had confronted her. I had won, but it wasn't just about winning. It was about finally being heard. It was about taking back my power. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in touch with Elizabeth. We talked on the phone almost every day, sharing our stories, our pain, our hope. She told me about her art, the paintings she had hidden away for decades. She told me about her garden, the plants she had nurtured and loved. She told me about her life, a life that had been stolen from her, but that she had rebuilt with quiet determination. She was an inspiration to me, a reminder that it was possible to survive even the darkest times. I divorced Mark. It was a clean, quiet break. I didn't want his money or his name. I just wanted my freedom. I used my share of the proceeds from the divorce to buy a small, run-down house in a town not far from Elizabeth's cottage. Together, we fixed it up. It became a sanctuary, not just for me, but for her, too. We lived a simple, quiet life. I started a blog, not just about my story, but about the stories of other women who had been silenced and erased. It became a place of healing for many. I called it the Ghost Chronicles. The blog took off in ways I never expected. Women from all over the world started writing to me, sharing their own stories of abuse, neglect, and survival. Some had been silenced by their families, others by their husbands, still others by society itself. They had all been made to feel invisible, worthless, forgotten, and they had all found a voice through my blog. I published their stories, gave them a platform, helped them reclaim their narratives. It was the most rewarding work I had ever done. Allure's empire crumbled. not in a spectacular public scandal, but in a quieter, more profound way. Richard, my father-in-law, after years of living under her thumb, finally saw the truth. He left her. He started a new life, a simpler one, and he was happier than I had ever seen him. The whispers in their social circle grew louder. She became a cautionary tale, a woman who had been so consumed by her need for control that she had destroyed everything she had built. Mark and I remained on distant but civil terms. He had changed, finally seeing his mother for who she really was. He had started therapy, trying to understand how he could have been so blind for so long. We didn't talk often, but when we did, there was a new respect between us. He had lost me, but he had finally found himself. As for me, I was no longer a ghost. I was alive. I was real. I had a new life, a new community, and a new purpose. The scars were still there, but they were a part of my story. They were a testament to my survival. Every day when I wake up, I look at the small locket on my nightstand. It's the one I sent to her. Engraved on the inside, it still says, "A ghost is just a person who is not done living yet." But now, I know what it truly means. It means that you cannot erase someone's spirit. You can try to silence them, you can try to make them invisible, but you can never truly extinguish their light. I had vanished, but I had not disappeared. I had finally found myself. I still think about that night often, the night I left. I remember the cold air, the dark streets, the feeling of freedom mixed with fear. I remember the bus ride, the strange towns, the anonymous faces. I remember the loneliness and the pain. But I also remember the strength I found, the resilience I discovered, the person I became. I am not the same woman who left that house. I am stronger, wiser, more determined. I am a survivor. Elizabeth passed away a few years later, peacefully in her sleep. I was with her in her final days, holding her hand, telling her how much she meant to me. She had become more than a friend, more than a mentor. She had become family. In her will, she left me her cottage and her garden, along with all her paintings. I still live there today, surrounded by her art and her memory. I tend to her garden, nurturing the plants she loved so much. I feel her presence everywhere, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is hope. I continue to write, to share my story and the stories of others. The Ghost Chronicles has become a movement, a community of survivors who refuse to be silenced. We are the ghosts who refuse to disappear. We are the voices that refuse to be erased. We are the proof that even in the face of cruelty, even in the face of rejection, we can find our way back to ourselves. We can reclaim our power. We can rewrite our stories. And so, when I look back on that night, that terrible night when Alina told me nobody would miss me, I realize she was both right and wrong. Right, in that I needed to disappear to find myself. Wrong, in that I was never truly invisible. I was always there, always fighting, always surviving. And in the end, I didn't just survive. I thrived. I built a new life, a new family, a new purpose. I became the person I was always meant to be. And that, more than anything, is the greatest revenge of all.